May I welcome all of you to this session, and Mr. Friedman. Actually, Mr. Friedman does not need an introduction, but I expect I should do some of the honors. He, of course, was born in at the height of the liberal period in Minnesota, which is reflected sometimes in his views. I understand from his Wikipedia biography that he wanted to be a professional golfer when he was young. Fortunately for the Arnold Palmers and Tiger Woods of this world, and for the world of ideas, he chose not to do that, and has been a great journalist, 3 Pulitzer Prizes, best-selling author, 6 books, 3 of them in the past 6 years, and perhaps the best-known expositor and ideologue of globalization as a system, which he did first when globalization was 10 years old in the Lexus and the Olive Tree. But he has, in a sense, has been a theme which has run through his work. We're going to talk for a little while, and then we'll open the floor, and you can ask some questions. I hope we will be able to keep to our 1-hour schedule. Mr. Friedman, initially when you spoke about globalization, you saw it as a system which is dominated by a superpower, USA, with full spectrum dominance. More lately, you've written a book, That Used to Be Us, which is perhaps much more concerned about where the US itself is tending. Do you see the globalization system as a little different now than you did, say, when you first wrote Lexus and the Olive Tree?
Well, thank you, Nitin, for joining me here in this conversation. Thanks to Dr. Pachari and the TERI community for having me here. So it's a good place to begin, I think, because I'm basically by trade a plumber. And by that I mean I always like to know where the plumbing is, where the technology is in the world, because I think it tells you a lot about what is happening and about what is possible. So really, Lexus and the Olive Tree was my first crack at trying to understand kind of the global plumbing system. And The World is Flat was my second attempt, and as this has evolved, and That Used to Be Us was the third attempt. So what's going on in the plumbing since I wrote The World is Flat? Actually, as people know, the book started in Bangalore. That's really where I got the brainstorm and a conversation at Infosys. And I started working on that book in 2004. And so when I sat down to write That Used to Be Us with my colleague Michael Mandelbaum, the first thing I did was to get the first edition of The World is Flat off my bookshelf, just to remind myself what I had said back then. And I opened it up to the index. I looked under A, B, C, D, E, F, F, A. Facebook wasn't in it. So when I was running around saying the world's all connected, the world is flat, Facebook didn't exist, Twitter was still a sound, the cloud was still in the sky, 4G was a parking place, LinkedIn was a prison, applications are what you sent to college, big data was a rap star, and for most people, Skype was a typo. I love doing that. Can I do that again? So all of that happened after I wrote The World is Flat. So what does that tell you? What it tells me is that we are not in a connected world anymore. We are in a hyper-connected world. And that is changing every job, every industry, every market, and every government. We've gone from a connected world to a hyper-connected world, and from an interconnected world to an interdependent world. Now, what does the latter mean? Because this will bleed into our conversation about energy and climate. When the world becomes not just interconnected, but interdependent, the first thing it means is that your friends can kill you much faster than your enemies. We have a mutual defense treaty with Greece under the NATO alliance. If Greeks do not pay their taxes sufficiently, and Greece falls out of the European community and Eurozone, my pension and yours will be affected. Greece is an ally of ours. In an interdependent world, your rivals falling is much more dangerous than your rivals rising. If China goes from 8% growth to 0% growth, I will be deeply harmed, as will you. If China gets another aircraft carrier, I couldn't care less. So everything gets inverted as the world gets this interdependent. And of course, what it means also is I cannot solve any of my problems independently. I can only solve them in a kind of multilateral alliance with other countries. So I think that's the biggest change underlying everything. And if I might say one thing about India, which really strikes me as fascinating, that I'm here as the world gets hyper-connected. And I was speaking with Khalid Malik from the UN about this yesterday. All the tools of living a middle-class lifestyle get pushed down farther and farther into the population. So democratic theory, for so many years, is said that basically only when a country reaches $10,000 per capita income will it move from an authoritarian country to a democratic country. We saw this in Taiwan and Korea, etc. But you had to have a certain level of per capita income. Well, I think India is a fascinating example of a country that the tools of being in the middle class, the education and the technology. I mean, when I was here first 20 years ago in India, I recall that if you had a landline telephone in your house, that meant you were in the middle class. Today, everyone in India has a cell phone, or virtually everyone. And so more and more people now have the tools of the middle class, cell phone, increasingly web-enabled, the ability to educate their kids in English and get even higher education, even though they don't have the income. So what strikes me about India today is it has a 300 million middle class and a 300 million now virtual middle class. They actually don't have the income in the middle class, but they think and behave like they are in the middle class. And what does that mean? It means they make demands on government for better governance, accountability, transparency, and end to corruption, as if they were in the middle class. And I think that's what the Anna Hazare movement's about. I think that's what the whole crusade, amazing social protests after the rape was about. And this is overwhelming your government. It can't deal with a 600 million person middle class. But I would argue all of this is derivative of the hyper-connecting of the world. By the way, the same thing is going on in China. If you followed the social protests that grew out of the decision by the censor in China to go in and rewrite the editorial in Southern Weekly on New Year's Day. That was a kind of rape in its own way. I would never compare it to the rape that happened here, but in terms of a violation, and what did it produce? It produced this massive social backlash based on Weibo Twitter, basically. And so what you're seeing, I think, is an interesting convergence that China has a strong government and a weak civil society, and India has this amazing civil society but weak government. And I think you're seeing both of them start to converge around a new balance.
You mentioned this issue of the middle class. Now, and you're absolutely right. The sheer size of the middle class, people talk in terms of more than half the population of the world being middle class in 20 years or whatever. But one of the things there is the disenchantment with politics as it is conducted amongst the middle class. We've seen this in India, and I sense that in your book, That Used to Be Us, you also raised this as an issue. When you talk of shock therapy, a radical center, yes, independent kind. How would you see this? How is politics today? Is it getting totally lost?
Well, I see enormous parallels between India and America, because I would argue, and I argued in our book, that my book was about America, but I see the parallel with India, that we are trapped with a corrupt duopoly. That is this Democratic and Republican, system. Our Congress, and I suspect your Congress, but I can only speak for my Congress. Our Congress today is a forum for legalized bribery. Okay? That's what it is. So what happens when your Congress becomes a forum for legalized bribery is that you actually cannot get to the right decisions because all the incentives, I'm a big believer, life is about incentives. If you move the cheese, you move the mouse. If you don't move the cheese, the mouse doesn't move. And right now, all the cheese in India and in America are to go to the extremes, okay? And until and unless you have a third party, and we have a third party, that actually demonstrates that the cheese is in the middle, in actually the huge middle that is unrepresented politically by these two extremes, you really cannot change anything. And we've had these third-party movements in our country that just haven't been sustained. We had it under Teddy Roosevelt. We had it with George Wallace, not my kind of third party, but nevertheless had a huge impact on the system. We had it with Ross Perot, who made Bill Clinton a deficit reducer. He made the deficit the biggest issue in America. At one point, Ross Perot had 40% of the vote back in 1992. He actually won 20% of the vote. And he was nuts. So had we actually had a sane third party today, had Michael Bloomberg run for president in this election, you would have had climate on the agenda in a way that it was completely absent because of the corrupt duopoly that we have right now.
Let me change track now that you mentioned about climate. Climate is obviously linked with the way the world energy economy is evolving. We see a huge change in the United States over the past few years, what with the new gas economy which is emerging. In what way is the world of energy changing and what implications does it have for us, both on our environmental side as well as on our political side?
Well, it's a good question, Nitin. Let me start with a kind of framework, okay. And then let's put that question in the framework. Because I look at the world today as actually shaped by two gigantic autistic forces. Autistic in the sense of feeling no emotion whatsoever. And they are the market and Mother Nature. These are the two giant forces, I think, shaping the world. And the only thing big enough to influence them, it seems to me, is politics at scale, okay? Now, I would argue that what we are doing today as a global community is that we are basically taunting in the NBA basketball sense, the two most autistic forces on the planet. We're basically saying to the market and Mother Nature at the same time. We certainly are, at least in America. I won't speak for the rest of the world. But we're basically saying to both these forces, what you got, baby? What you got? That all you got? One little 1 centigrade degree temperature rise, that all you got? 0.5% interest rate hike, that all you got? That all you got? Well, one day, we are going to wake up, and the market and Mother Nature are going to show us what they got, okay? And the thing that I think you need to keep in mind is that Mother Nature is just chemistry, biology, and physics. My friend Rob Watson taught me that. She's just chemistry, biology, and physics, and she's going to do whatever chemistry, biology, and physics dictate. And you can't come to Mother Nature and say, Mother Nature, we've been having a bad recession since 2008. Could you take 4 or 5 years off? Because we're having a bad recession, and we need to do this kind of growth thing and emit more carbon. That'd be okay with you? No, she's going to do whatever chemistry, biology, and physics dictate. And Mother Nature, God bless her, to put this in American lingo, baseball, she always bats last, and she always bats 1,000. Do not mess with Mother Nature. The market, Father Greed, the market's just greed and fear, greed and fear, greed and fear, greed and fear. The balance of greed and fear at any millisecond around a stock, a bond, a commodity, a piece of real estate. The market's going to do whatever greed and fear dictate, the balance between the two at any moment. And what we are basically doing is taunting both of them at the same time. How are we doing that? Well, we actually have been practicing the exact same accounting in the market and Mother Nature. How so? In both the market and Mother Nature, across the 90s and the early 2000s, we were massively underpricing risk, privatizing the gains, and socializing the losses. So in our housing industry in America and the subprime industry, we massively underpriced the risk of subprime mortgages. We allowed the banks and investment banks who did that to privatize the gains. And then when they all blew up, we socialized the losses across the entire American economy and to some degree the whole global economy. Thank you very much. We do the exact same thing in nature. We massively underprice the risk of emitting carbon. We allow the oil and coal companies that do that to privatize the gains. And then we socialize the losses across all the carbon in the atmosphere, which we're charging on our kids' Visa cards that will come back in their life in the form of disruptive climate change. We are practicing the exact same accounting in both the market and Mother Nature. Now, underlying these accounting principles are two broader principles. I spoke about this at the TERI graduation the other day, of IBG and YBG. I'll be gone or you'll be gone. I sell you this subprime mortgage, even though I know that you only can show $10,000 in income and your only ID is your Delta Sky Miles card, but nevertheless I give you this mortgage. I then bundle these mortgages into a bond and I sell them around the world to unsuspecting banks. Why not? I'll be gone. Oh, by the way, you can't pay your mortgage back? You'll be gone. Okay? So I'll be gone or you'll be gone. Well, the real truth is YBH, you'll be here. And when we socialize the losses, you'll be here. Now, underlying these principles is a massive shift in values that happened over the last 20 years between the greatest generation, in America, I'm speaking now as an American, and my generation, the baby boomer generation. Our parents built us an incredible world of freedom. First, by defeating the Nazis and the totalitarians in World War II and winning the Cold War, and then by extending civil rights and women's rights throughout our country. They built us an incredible world of freedom. By practicing sustainable values, values that sustain the environment, business, and relationships. My generation, the baby boomer generation, we are the grasshopper generation. We ate it all. We're almost done. We pretty much ate it all. We practice situational values. Learned this from my friend Desai. What are situation values? You do whatever the situation allows. It's the Nike commercial. Just do it. If the situation allows me to give you a subprime mortgage for $1 million home, even though you can only show $10,000 in income and your Delta Sky Miles card, I just do it. The situation allows me to emit all this carbon. I just do it. So we have been practicing situational values. Now we need our kids to be the regeneration. What is the regeneration? They need to bring sustainable values back to both the market and Mother Nature. Because guess what? What freedom was to our parents' generation, sustainable values and sustainability need to be to the regeneration. Because if we don't now, and our kids, bring sustainable values back to the market and Mother Nature, they will impose on us, collectively and individually, so many restraints that it will be worse than had the Soviets won the Cold War. The restraints that Mother Nature is going to impose on us and our lifestyle, and that the market will impose on us in terms of taxes, will be worse than had the Soviets won the Cold War. So what freedom was to our parents' generation, sustainability and sustainable values need to be to the regeneration.
Because the point that you make about the links between Mother Nature and the market is something which we need to understand in India also. For instance, our problems of the fiscal deficit and the current account deficit and our problems of environmental management are intimately connected with our energy policy. Absolutely. And in a sense, both of them are a product of a poorly designed energy policy. So I'm very happy that you raised this issue because I think it has resonance in India also, where people don't always see this connection. Yeah. People don't always see that what you're doing is bad for both. But you sound quite pessimistic about prospects. In the sense, in your book, you leave open the possibility whether the narrative has a happy ending or a sad ending.
Well, you know, we tell everyone our book, you know, called That Used to Be Us, How America Lost Its Way and the World It Invented and How It Can Come Back. We tell everyone it has a happy ending. We just don't know whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Okay. And that really will depend on us. And it is about political will. This is all achievable. But what do the climate problem and the deficit problem have in common? That we are in the window right now where we can still address both in a meaningful way that is also politically saleable. But what happens when you get the hockey stick effect in both the climate and the deficit, where the deficit reaches 90% of GDP or more, and when we go from 380 parts per million to 450 parts per million in the atmosphere, once the curve gets up there, the delta, what you have to do just to stay where you are becomes almost politically impossible. In other words, when we reach a certain point with the deficit, every tax hike we impose will just go to pay interest on the debt. It won't bend the curve anymore. And when we get to 450 ppm, every bit of efficiency we impose, every solar panel we put in place, every windmill we put up, will just be to keep us at 450 ppm. It'll just keep us at 4 °C temperature rise. It'll just keep us at a place no human beings have ever lived at on this planet. And so we're in the window now, whether we either bend the curve on the deficit or we bend the curve on the climate, or we don't, because otherwise you reach a point where everything you do, and it'll be onerous in and of itself, just keeps you where you are. And one will ensure low growth, and one will ensure constant climate disruptions. So that's why, you know, we really need, I think, extraordinary leadership right now. And we haven't had it. In America, for the last 4 years, our president did not use the term climate change. I mean, you can count the times on one hand in any kind of national forum he used it. Climate change became a 4-letter word in America over the last 4 years on Barack Obama's watch. People are so excited because he mentioned climate change in his inaugural address. Think how crazy that is. We get excited that a Democratic president once every 4 years uses the term climate change. How backward we have gone. And I think that that's why I'm deeply worried. So it seems to me that basically what we're really doing is in both the deficit and the climate, we're waiting for the perfect storm. And that is a storm big enough to end the debate, but not end the world. Okay? That's really what we're doing. We're just waiting for the market and Mother Nature to so impose restraints on this that the politicians basically have to accede. Now pay attention to what just happened in America. Barack Obama pushed through an increase in our income tax at the highest rate from about 35 to 39%. It will raise $600 billion over 10 years. That's about $60 billion a year. At the exact same time that was passed by the House and the Senate, they passed aid to the Northeast region of America, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Maine, Delaware, Pennsylvania, to pay for the cleanup of the Sandy hurricane. Guess what the bill was? You couldn't make this up. For the Sandy hurricane, $60 billion. $60.2 billion. So the exact amount of tax increase that we passed for 2013 will go to pay for the cleanup of one superstorm. And we'll be left with net nothing.
So in a
have a nice day.
So in a sense, the way I hear you, you are saying, to use Obama's slogan, yes, we can. And the real issue is, will we? This is really the challenge that you're putting up. We have a lot of leaders from politics, from business, from academia here. I'm sure they have sort of the reflection or questions which they may wish to pose to you. So let me open the floor. Let me ask you to pose questions to Tom Friedman. Who wants to come in at this point? Yes, I see the gentleman there. From Flogen. Yeah.
We'll repeat your question. That's okay. If you just tell us, I'll repeat it.
Ketan, your eyesight's better than mine. You handle the questioning. Bring the people in.
Right. Yes, sir.
I'll try and regulate the...
Okay. Brief question, please. Brief introduction. Thank you.
I'll try my best. I just wanted to ask you one simple question which we haven't addressed here. That the present practice, which is what was introduced of a free global capitalist economy, which works on profit, and profit, of course, goes with more sales, and more sales go with more products, and that makes technology totally captive, and that's why we have these 100 cell phones and thousands of computers and PlayStations, and they all end up being junked. So we've been producing this whole toxic waste and laying it down on nature. And there's no technology without toxic waste. And now what we find is that, you know, maybe 1 billion people consuming like this for about 40 years have laid waste to 1/3 of the planet. So with values and what you were talking about, we have to make some change over there, right? And let's talk a little bit about that change that we're going to make.
Sure. Good question. So my book isn't called Hot, Flat, and Crowded for nothing. Because basically my argument is really alluded to by your question, that like when I speak to groups in America about this issue, I'll hold up my book and say it's called Hot, Flat, and Crowded. Oh, you don't believe in hot? No problem. Anyone got an eraser? We'll take hot out of there. You don't believe in hot? That's between you and your beach house. I believe in it, you don't? Fine. But you better believe in flat and crowded, because that's just a math issue. That is, the world is we're going from 7 billion to 9 billion. That's baked into the cake. And more of those people in what I call flat world can see how we live in America and aspire to how we live. Driving American-sized cars on American-sized roads to American-sized homes and eating American-sized Big Macs. Now, when the world goes to flat and crowded, just forget about climate. Clean energy is going to be the next great global industry. We know that for sure. The question I ask is in America, will we be in it or not? Now, implicit in your question is, do we not actually need to rewire the whole system to get away from growth as we know it today and to redefine growth? And I would tell you, we absolutely are going to have to do that. And we should be redefining GDP toward green GDP right now, if I had my way. But I don't start the conversation there because I find that's a real showstopper. Like if you tell people, basically, we're going to have to rewire human beings to want less, okay? It tends to be a showstopper in India and China where people say, well, that's very nice for you to say. You've eaten it all. You live in a big house now, and I should stay in my little, one-room house. And so we may have to go there. But my attitude is, could we first just try turning off the lights at night? That is, there is so much waste in the system right now, so massive amount of waste due to inefficiency, that if we could first just see what happens if we try to get more efficient, then let's see what we have to rewire in terms of human behavior. But ultimately, I think we have to go in that direction.
Yes.
In fact, the challenge, in fact, the theme of this is resource-efficient growth and development, which is precisely what the point that is
Governor,
making.
yeah.
Let's do that first. Yes? And then...
First, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Josh.
I guess my question is, due to the reaffirmation, if you will, of President Obama in a second term, does that give you some sense of optimism that the fact that he's entering a second term, that maybe he has the opportunity to have a little more freedom and move a little bit faster?
Well, it's a good question, Charlie, and I hope it does. Well, I hope it does too. But my motto right now is break all the rules. Break all the rules. And if you're not ready to be radical now, then he must be saving it for his presidential library. And so on every front, my motto is break all the rules. And just come out and say, I'm for a carbon tax. I'm for putting in place a system of higher performance standards reinforced by a carbon tax, which completely remakes the market, gives financial certainty to investors, drives research. We need to be in that loop, it seems to me, to counter the loop that we're in of underpricing risk, privatizing gains, and socializing the losses. And I think the public's ready. I think they're really ready to be led. But I'm still not sure that the president isn't saving it for his library.
Yes, sir.
Just short. Your definition of bribery and corruption, because you mentioned a couple of times. We were corrupt during Great Depression? Did we have corrupt values during Great Depression?
Sure. This is hardly new. It's a difference of scale. And it's a difference of scale related to different scale problems. You know, at one point we had 70 members of the House of Representatives on the House Banking Committee. Isn't that interesting that so many of our congressmen were interested in banking? Or was it because being on the House Banking Committee was a license to steal from the banking industry by holding fundraisers for our financial industry? At a time when, okay, we were on the verge of this financial crisis. So yeah, we've had corruption in our politics for as old as democracy, okay? I would argue that it's a difference of scale, that's a difference of degree, in relation to the problems we have to face is a difference in kind. No country without corruption that I know of. I haven't met that place, so maybe, I don't know. But again, it's all related to where you are, okay? There's a big difference between corruption in America when it was an agricultural society and CO2 in the atmosphere was locked at 280 ppm, you know, for 2,000 years, and the effect that it can have now when we require big changes. Because, you know, one thing I learned about energy, this is a systems problem, okay? Nature is a system, and the only way to deal with a system is with another system. If you don't have a systemic response, you have a hobby. I like hobbies. I used to build model airplanes as a young boy. I wouldn't try to change the climate as a hobby. So unless you can put in place a systems response, you're not going to get the scale you need in order to deal with a systems problem.
Was the corruption responsible for depression, would you say? For the Great Depression?
Was the corruption responsible? No, no. The Depression had many different causes.
Right.
Mr. Friedman, you mentioned...
Where are you?
Could you stand up, please?
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
You mentioned 280 parts per million. You mentioned 380 parts per million. You mentioned 450 parts per million. I also think it's important to mention the safe upper limit, which is 350 parts per million.
Right.
And also that it was probably crossed before I was even born.
Absolutely.
So just a pointer.
Yeah, thank you. It's
Right.
a very good
Thank you
point.
very much, yes. Yes, the gentleman right in front, yeah.
Thank you. Very short question. 4 years from now, Mr. Friedman.
I can't see you. Where are you?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you for a great speech. 4 years from now, why don't you run for president?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
he has in his book called for an independent party candidate from the radical center who can give shock therapy to. Come on, now answer that.
So it's thank you, Dad. I didn't know you were here, but it's thank you. No, I get my aggravation playing golf, is what I tell people. Look, everyone tries to make their contribution in their own way, and I try to make mine through my column and through my writing and shaping how we think about issues. I wouldn't want to suggest anything more than that, I'm a big believer that to name something is to own it. So I do a lot of naming of things. I really think how people think about a problem is the beginning of wisdom, and that's really what Hot, Flat, and Crowded was about, because I really believe, and I don't mean this in a jingoistic way, but if America goes green, the world goes green. If America doesn't go green, the world will go green in its own way, but at a different pace, scope, and scale. And so I'm really focused on the Archimedes point here of trying to shift America. And what has been frustrating to me, I voted for Obama the first time for one reason, because I thought he would change the polls, not read the polls. Thought he would change the polls, not read the polls. Turned out he did a lot more reading of the polls than changing of the polls. So, one of the things I've tried to do in my own writing is to redefine green. Because if you notice, the word green was really owned by its enemies, the people who hated it. That's really what happened here. And they named it liberal, sissy, girly man, unpatriotic, vaguely French. Vaguely French. Vaguely. Mr. Gore, you're looking a little French to me. Okay. So what I've been trying to do in my writing is rename green geopolitical, geostrategic, geoeconomic, capitalistic, patriotic. Green is the new red, white, and blue. Because when people think of it that way, that drives so many other things. Now, when that's your effort, and you have a president for 4 years who does not use the term climate change because some knucklehead political consultant did a poll somewhere that told him it was a loser, you have wasted 4 years. That is unforgivable at this moment.
It's good, sir, that you mentioned America so many times. Do you know what they say about Americans, the best things? The Americans always get it right after they've tried everything else. Yes.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, this is Vaidehi Pandit from Miranda House, University of Delhi. Sir, I want to ask that you said America is supporting sustainability, then why it is not rectifying Kyoto Protocol?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Why don't you rectify the Kyoto Protocol?
On climate.
If America supports sustainability, why don't you rectify the Kyoto Protocol?
Look, it's what I've basically been talking about. There's a complete disconnect between the political system and the values, of where the public is at right now. And when I talk about America, I'm differentiating between what people, believe in, what a majority of the people believe in, and what the political system was ready to do. Our political system is captive of a certain very deeply entrenched vested interests in the oil and gas industry, and that was reflected in the Kyoto Protocol. But I will tell you, personally, I'm not against Kyoto. I'm not against Copenhagen. I was in Copenhagen. That was a freak show, okay? My view is if you can get 192 countries in the world to all agree on verifiable reductions of their CO2 emissions, God bless you. I will be with you, okay? But I just like to start on my own country and get us to do the right thing, because I think if we get to do the right thing, one good example is worth 1,000 theories. And I think America moving toward a carbon tax, to a real low, carbon economy, would have so much bigger effect. So many more people would copy us than they would under the compulsion of a global treaty. And so, not against Kyoto, again, if you can get all that, they're great consciousness raisers, but I think these multilateral agreements are really not the way to go. I think it's got to happen individually in each country.
Do you think subnational activities like the sort of thing California is doing or Quebec is doing has a scope for contagion?
I think they're helpful. I actually think President Bush had it right. Get the 15 biggest emitters together, including India and China, and try to work out a smaller agreement between them I think you get the rest of the world. But when you get in these endless arguments, you know, with countries about wealth transfer, that's just a loser. And that's what happened in Copenhagen. And it all becomes a kind of gravity-free zone. You know, we got up in Copenhagen, we actually promised, don't you remember it? We promised the world $100 billion in wealth transfer as part of a global agreement. There is no planet on which that's going to happen, okay? So these international conferences are, they're gravity-free zones. People say whatever they want, you know. I think you've got to start with individual countries doing real things.
Right, yes, the gentleman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. I really enjoyed your comments.
Speak into the mic, sir. Just speak.
I'm Stephen Mulkey. I'm president of Unity College in Unity, Maine. And
louder.
You have to speak a little louder, please. Thank you.
I'm Stephen Mulkey, president of Unity College in the United States. And you've written frequently about higher education and education in general. And I wonder if you could comment a little bit about the role of this generation in college and their motivation. We have to be very responsive to our students' demand for sustainability. Thank you.
Well, it's a very good question. Thank you. You know, I mean, look, it's part of the suicide of the Republican Party today that it is simultaneously at war with math, physics, human biology, and the fastest growing population in America, Hispanics. So, like, you couldn't make that up. You couldn't invent that, you know. And you go on a college campus like yours in America, and you come there as a climate denier, I would suspect, you know, you would not find a lot of support among young people. Yet this party had it at the core of its position basically a climate denial philosophy. And so I know where this is going to be 20 years from now. And it's going to be where the core of your students are as they become adults and enter politics. But we don't have 20 years. I live by Dana Meadows' motto. We have exactly enough time starting now. We have exactly enough time starting. We do not have 20 years to wait for Senator Inhofe to retire from Oklahoma and agree that, you know, that something is going on. We are living in the age of global weirding, all right? And it's going on every day now in America. I live in Bethesda, Maryland. The temperature there was 0 degrees 2 weeks ago and 70 degrees yesterday. I mean, that's just, the climate's getting weird. And we know that that fits all the climate models, that the hots get hotter, the dries get drier, the wets get wetter, the colds get colder. And unfortunately, we get excited now that the president mentioned climate change in his inaugural address without actually saying anything that he intended to do about it. So that's why I'm an optimist by nature. I mean, if you want to be an optimist about America, stand on your head, because the country looks so much better from the bottom up than the top down, okay? So that's why I'm an optimist, but I'm a frustrated optimist, okay? Because what makes me an optimist about America is that the country is still full of people, and I see the same thing in India. It's still full of people who just didn't get the word. Thank God. They didn't get the word that China's going to eat our breakfast, that Germany's going to eat our lunch, that climate change means we're all dead. And they just go out and start stuff and invent stuff and collaborate on stuff. It's fantastic. When I wrote Hot, Flat, and Crowded, I did a national book tour for a year. I'd go to towns, big and small, all over America, universities like your own. People would come up to me after my talk. Every kind of energy invention you could imagine. Clean energy invention. Mr. Friedman, I've got a duck. It paddles a wheel, blows up a balloon, issues methane, turns a turbine. I heard the craziest stuff. But it told me the country is alive from the bottom up. I mean, I do book signing. People give me their business cards. I go back to my hotel room afterwards. I empty my pocket of business cards. Rock stars get room keys. I get business cards. But they're amazing. They tell you how alive the country is. But our problem and your problem in India, because it looks the same here to me. If you were to draw a picture of America today, it would be the space shuttle taking off. You ever seen the space shuttle take off? All this incredible thrust coming from below. That's all that civil society, all those innovators who didn't get the word, thank God. But our booster rocket, Washington, D.C., is cracked and leaking energy, and the pilots in the cockpit are fighting over the flight plan. So we can't achieve escape velocity right now to get into the next great industrial revolution. Neither can you here. So we both need to fix the booster rocket and get the pilots to stop fighting over the flight plan, which is so obvious. That's our challenge. I think it's India's challenge as well.
Sir.
Tim Gregoire, Yale University. I'm puzzled that I read or hear so little about the military implications of climate change. Are there none?
A very good question. Are there, did you hear that? Military implications of climate change. So, welcome to the Arab Spring. When did the vegetable seller in Tunisia burn himself alive? The exact same month that the World Food Organization told us that world food prices hit a record high. Why did world food prices hit a record high? Because that year, massive drought and wildfires in Australia and Russia led both of them to ban all wheat exports. That led to higher beef prices and global instability in the whole sort of global food chain, led to higher food prices. Higher food prices lead to more political disruption. More political disruption in the Middle East leads to higher oil prices. Higher oil prices lead to higher phosphorus prices. Higher phosphorus prices lead to higher fertilizer prices. That leads to higher food prices, which feeds more political instability, which leads to higher oil price. That's the loop we're in. And by the way, Syria, the uprising in Syria, it comes after a 10-year drought, the longest on record in northern Syria, which led to 1 million people leaving the countryside in both herding and agriculture and moving to urban areas, put enormous stress on the urban infrastructure, and presto changeo, a little political spark, and the whole place goes up in flames. So these two systems are now totally interlinked and working to reinforce each other. And that's why only a counter-cycle, higher efficiency standards, and a carbon price that leads to greater innovation and deployment and investment, you need a cycle and a system to beat a cycle and a system. And that's really what I'm arguing.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Satish Krishnamurthy. I'm from Open University in UK.
Into the mic, louder, yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm from Higher Education Institute, and I strongly believe the philosophy of academics, politics, and industry has to come together to answer the sustainable problem. And I also believe that it has to be in 4 stages, like transformation, translation, engagement, that engagement with the public, and enterprise. And these four things, challenging things, has to be there in the youth. And the youth are the one, I think my generation is gone. I think the generation to come, and also the next generation, they have to be an entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs that develop things on a sustainable manner.
Okay, what's the question?
The product is, how do we are going to make it happening, these all 4 phenomena globally. So we talk about leadership. These leadership has these 4 qualities in the mind, which can carry the world in a bigger stage.
Sure, a good question. So first of all, I agree with 99% of what you said, just 1% I don't agree with, which is that I'm just 59. And so I'd like to think I'm still 59 years young. It is, to me, not credible that I say this is a problem that the young have to deal with, okay? Because I hope to be here, for a few more years, and we made this problem. And so we owe them, it seems to me, one thing, creating a system that will basically be enabling and nurturing of them to do exactly the things that you do, that you talked about. And we need to be doing that now. And that's why I say my motto is break all the rules. Because otherwise you're just waiting for the perfect storm to force you to do it. And the difference between us doing it and waiting for a perfect storm to do it is the difference between having your tooth removed by a dentist with Novocaine and having it done by caveman with stone tools. Okay, the market and Mother Nature, they'll get you the same place, like a caveman, but there'll be blood all over your front, and the other 3 teeth around the rotten tooth will be missing as well.
Ma'am.
Mr. Friedman, just an observation. You had mentioned sustainable values, situational values, and multilateral frameworks. Now, the irony is that we developing countries are under a lot of pressure today to open our trade and investment regimes, and ironically in the sectors which will most lead to mindless consumption. So unfortunately, my generation is the last one of sustainable values, and my child will be the first generation of situational values unless you help us stop that pressure.
It's a good, very good point. And so, again, if you think about it as a systems problem, there's also potential good news that can work the other way. And that is when IT and ET meet. When the IT revolution and the energy technology revolution meet, you get a much greater possibility for globalization. So what do I mean? Is that if we can get distributed energy at scale, combined with the internet, it allows me as an Indian villager to live in my village, act globally, and live locally. That is, if I have the energy to educate my kids, to start a business locally, to do the farming I need locally, if I have the distributed energy to do that, plus I'm wired hyper-connectedly to the world, why do I need to move to the slums of Delhi or Mumbai? I'd much rather be in my village with my people, in my culture, my extended family. So to me, the great hope for the world is that ET and IT revolutions actually converge around distributed energy and hyperconnectivity, which actually allows distributed empowerment. And I think that's really the game changer that can reverse a lot of the pressures you're talking about.
Yes.
A very warm good morning, sir. My name is Ashish Jindal from TERI. My question is, how do you rate on scale of 1 to 5 countries, namely India, China, and USA, in terms of sustainable awareness and its execution in the field of water, waste, and energy?
I would say it's a perfectly legitimate question, but they all have strengths and weaknesses, I think. Indians live, your global carbon footprint is a fraction. It's a rounding error on ours. You know what I mean? Now, part of that is because of poverty, but part of it's also culture, And so I think India has certain things it could really teach the world in terms of how to live in a sustainable way. China's strength right now is it's doing to solar panels what it did to tennis shoes, making them cheap and available for the whole world. It's also, of course, its industrialization is creating a huge challenge, but that challenge is first and foremost to China. And you see what's going on in Beijing right now with particles in the atmosphere. China's going to have to go green. It cannot, it's reaching that point where it simply cannot grow in any other than a green way. And I think that will be a huge tipping point. I think our strength is innovation, our innovation prowess to invent the next generation of technologies, our power to set an example, but it's a power we're not using right now to the scope and scale we need. So I think we all have strengths and weaknesses, and I wouldn't rank them, one to the other.
That's all we have time for. Thank you very much, sir, for a wonderful and very, very insightful discussion. Mr. Desai.